First of all, welcome and thank you for joining us. I don't know whereabouts you are, but it's sunny here, so we are very grateful for those of you who've remained inside to join us for this session. So I'm Alison Cairns, and on behalf of the MGA, welcome you to this training session, which is being delivered by Sedgwick this time. So before we get started, just have a couple of quick housekeeping points to run through. Firstly, just to let you know that the session is being recorded, and there's a little bit more about that to follow once I've gone through some other aspects. Please can we ask that you keep your microphones and cameras off. It helps in terms of us minimising any technical issues, and we're not saying that you can't ask questions. What we would like is if you could pop them in the chat and we will address them at the end. So there is a little chat box on the side, so please pop in your questions as we go along, and then when we get to the end there's a Q&A session and we will address them then. If we don't get opportunity, if you have put your contact details in, we can get back to you afterwards. So also a quick point to reference is that the MGAA's Programme of Learning and Insights is accredited by the Chartered Insurance Institute for the quality of the content and the supporting materials. So this means that there are CPD hours available, which you can record on your CPD PDP documents if relevant to your ongoing professional development. So reference to the recording of the session, it will be available on our website in the member area and also on our YouTube channel, and we will follow up after the event with a mail advising you of the links and also a copy of the presentation. So one last thing from me is just to say that I will share very shortly in the chat a link to the feedback survey. It does only take 2 minutes, no more, and would really encourage you after you've viewed the session and listened in if you could send some feedback to us, because it really is important and helps us shape things for the future. So without any further delay, I'm going to hand it over to Ian Gibb, who will introduce himself and is also delivering our session on driving the sustainability challenge in claims. I'll hand over to you, Ian.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Myself, I'll do that part. So Ian Gibbs, Sedgwick, loss adjusters, and I've been a surveyor in this loss adjusting industry for about nearly 30 years. So my background is as a chartered building surveyor, and worked in this arena looking at claims repair and refurbishment following fires, floods, etc. One of the things in the last few years I've been most interested in is looking at how we can make claims more sustainable. And that's been quite an interesting challenge from a surveyor's perspective, because there's a lot of building claims out there, and there's a lot that the surveying arena can do in order to help drive the sustainability challenge. I look at it much wider than that in our discussion today, but that's where I come from. So let's have a look at the learning objectives for today. So what we're wanting you to get out of today, I always come on these sessions myself and you think, what am I going to learn? So we would like you to learn and really understand how climate change has had a direct impact on the insurance sector. And further than that, to understand the importance of taking a systems approach to carbon reduction. And if you're taking that system approach, I would like you to be able to describe some practical things you could do to reduce the carbon impact of claims. So taking it from the theory into the practical. As far as the agenda is concerned, I'm going to start off talking about the challenge very briefly of the climate change, just to introduce the subject really, and then talk about how this impacts on the insurance industry. We then start looking at the systems approach I talk about, looking at the whole claim process and the claim handling rather than just individual parts. And then I want to give you those practical examples of what you can actually do to reduce the carbon impact and environmental impact of claims. And then we'll wrap up at the end. And as I said, questions in the chat, and happy to answer them at the end. Okay, so climate change. There's a really good graph here. You've seen similar ones before, I'm sure. I think this is the easiest way scientists are trying to demonstrate and get across the general public the scale of the challenge that we face and how much change is going on in the climate. You'll see there that for, I think it's 800,000 years, we've varied the concentration of CO2 between sort of 170 and 270 parts per million. Then in the blink of an eye, we've gone to 422 parts per million. So it's sort of catastrophic change in terms of the CO2 in the atmosphere. And whatever the cause, when we think about the reasons for it, doesn't really matter. It's changed. And there's internationally accepted now that there is an impact on our climate of having this much CO2 in the atmosphere. And therefore, as a world, we've decided that we need to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So it therefore starts to be important to businesses and sort of citizens of the world, as they say. So how does this all come about in terms of trying to understand what we've got to do next to try and reach the levels that the countries around the world are signing up to? So the International Panel on Climate Change, this is their graph. And following this Paris Agreement, so when there was a meeting in Paris talking about the climate, what could we do to address it? How could we come together and make a plan? And the aim is to halve the emissions by 2030, net zero mid-century, and then go negative beyond that. So quite a significant aim and goal to try and get to. So if I'm just looking at that dotted green line, you'll see that the trajectory is upwards now when we already can see there's a massive change that's happened. So what the Paris Agreement really clarified was that we need to take 20 billion tonnes of CO2 out of the atmosphere every year for the next decade to get us on the path to 1.5 degree change in climate. And after that, we'd have to take another 20 billion tonnes a year for another 50, 60 years in order to remove that carbon dioxide from the atmosphere that you saw in that previous graph. So what we're saying is trying to get back to that level playing field by reducing the amount we put in and then taking it out again. So for insurance claims, this and for living life, this means change for everybody if we're actually going to achieve this ambitious target. So how does this affect the insurance industry? As I said, the International Panel on Climate Change sets worldwide targets on emissions. So this is the planet, we need to do this. Governments will then set their own binding targets set in law to reduce the emissions. They're part of that pie. Now recently, I think in the last probably month, I heard on the television, on the news, that we've set another target. So every, I think it's 5 years, I think it may be, that we relook at our targets. So we've set another target. Government then obviously is not going to reduce emissions in the UK by just setting a target. What they're then going to do is set the next level of targets for businesses. So currently large businesses have to report their emissions and set reduction targets. So there's a explanation of what size of business, what turnover you need to be in order to do that. So what happens next is the people that invest in business, buy businesses, they start making strategic decisions about their investments depending on the carbon emissions of that business. Because the reality of it is, if you're a high emitting carbon business, then you'll be less attractive in the years to come to investors. So already investors will start looking at this data and see what is your carbon emissions and what are you doing about it. So that starts to drive investors' decisions. So business leaders, if you're running an insurance company or somebody in the insurance sector, you're starting to realize that actually the reports going out suggesting perhaps we've got high carbon emissions as an insurer, therefore our investors will make different decisions, therefore I need to reduce the carbon emissions in my business in order to do that. But where the rubber really hits the road is the real change that's required at operational level to reduce the carbon footprint. It's about every part of how business works, from the processes, from the organization, the supply chain, what we measure, what's important. And it's really, really crucial that as we move into this transition to trying to reduce the carbon footprint, we understand that this is really, really difficult to do in a sense of it requires fundamental change. So going down the next level, so now if an insurer is having a board meeting and talking about we need to reduce the carbon footprint of our business, then it's on the agenda and we're having the discussion, what they're actually going to have to do. First thing they have to do is decarbonise their investment portfolio. So you'll see lots of insurers talking about this, and they'll be talking about not investing their funds in businesses which are high carbon. So if you're oil and coal or steel making, it's incredibly high carbon. The challenge is they're incredibly profitable. So you have to replace one of those profitable industries you're investing your money in another. And that is a real challenge for profitability. So once they've looked at that, and a lot of insurers have already done that or on that journey, they've set targets, they're looking at their business emissions. And this, where we talk about different scopes, and those that know a bit about climate measurement and change will realise that they've defined these different types of scopes. So just to explain in simple terms, these are your business emissions, so direct impact of CO2. So scope 1 is if you had a factory and you had an oil-fired boiler that was heating that factory or creating energy to the processes you needed to follow, that would be your scope 1 emissions. If you were not burning that fossil fuel directly, you were taking electricity from the grid, say, to like the lights in your business or electricity for your cars, that's your scope 2 emissions. So the way to think about it is directly burning fossil fuels, scope 1, indirectly burning them, so not then it's scope 2, whatever thing you're doing in the business that uses that energy. Now, scope 3 is clearly defined as purchased goods and services. So that's the things you buy to run your business. So if you're a professional services firm like we are, you are going to buy desks and tables, and you're going to buy computers, paper, cups, all of these have a carbon footprint. So what you're trying to do is measure that and understand how it needs to be reduced. Now, the question in the insurance market at the moment is, where does claim fulfillment sit? Is the scope 3 emissions of X insurer, do they own those scope 3 emissions for fulfilling the claims, repairing, rebuilding a hotel, replacing a car that's had a fire? Or is it in their supply chain that is the goods and services that they purchase? So it's not that the jury's out about where it sits, but even if it isn't the insurer's direct emissions, then it will be as part of their supply chain. And coming soon is scope 4 emissions. So these are talking about how you decarbonise the environment, really. So you could do things that reduce the carbon footprint of the planet, which in some way would offset the carbon that you can't reduce out of your business. So they've talked about, carbon capture has been heard about a lot, but also what could you do to reduce the environmental burden? So it may be something like you put solar panels on your roof, which creates energy, which is net zero energy. That's a really positive thing to do. You don't need that energy, so sell it back to the grid. So you'd be doing something there, which is first you've got low carbon energy solution, but also you're creating low carbon energy for the grid. So that might be the sort of thing that scope 3 will cover. But there will be residual emissions that you have that you can't get rid of. You have to buy a computer, and that computer is made of plastics, and therefore there is carbon associated with it. So there'll be things you absolutely can't remove from your business, but you may be able to use scope 4 to offset those. So how do you approach the challenge? This is obviously already, I'm showing this is not an easy thing to do, with lots of tentacles and change that is going to main for any business. But it's really simple, like most business challenges, I guess. You have to design, what is your ambition, what you're trying to achieve here. And once that is clear, and that's obviously at a senior level, that's setting the path that the business is on, then you need to educate, enlighten, and keep learning. So you need somebody that's an expert, either a consultant or really want someone in your business that is really driving the agenda of greater sustainable approaches. So then once you have that ambition, you have the people in your business or supporting your business to create the strategy, you need to create that strategy. So that's the senior level buy-in. Anyone you speak to in this arena talks about it has to be from the top that this is important and this is something that we've got to address, and then obviously disseminated through the business. Then get started doing something. The obvious thing people do is change the light bulbs, allergy light bulbs, recycle, have electric cars. All that stuff is excellent, and that's working on. I think big thing is a green energy. So that's all great, and definitely something that most companies can do just with some organisational change, and not at a huge cost. But then there's longer term, harder solutions where you're actually trying to change the way your business works and is organised. That is getting harder. And those are the longer term solutions you have to build over time. If I go down like a next level, as we're sort of peeling an onion here and trying to get down to different levels of action that you need to take. I just thought an example of what we're doing in terms of monitoring and managing this impact on the business. How are we looking at it in practice? Well, you need to understand the way your business works and set a way of working. So we've got an ISO 14001, and many large companies have, which is an environmental management system. So sets the way that we work in terms of limiting the impact, gives us objectives and targets for the environment. And that's sort of setting these factors in the background of your business, which is meaning in your DNA, it's to look after the environment. So you could become carbon neutral. So ensure that is compliant with the latest regulation. Now that means carbon neutral means that you're offsetting your carbon. So if you had 100 tons of carbon that you couldn't get rid of, you'd offset them by planting trees or something like that. So that is not reducing all the carbon in your business. It's taking the carbon that's left and offsetting it somewhere where the carbon will be captured. But then you also have to say, well, okay, I need to know what I need to reduce in terms of my carbon. So I need to measure it. So SBTI is Science-Based Target Initiative. So this is a regulatory framework which helps you set your targets, helps you measure. It's very detailed, very quite tricky to do, but is trusted for the rigor that goes into actually measuring your carbon. And then you have to work out what's your target for reduction. And there will be some residual carbon left, that is inevitable, but it's about reducing as much as you can. And then it's like engaging, getting ideas about how you can make the changes. So we're part of an organisation called ClimateWise at University Cambridge, which is bringing insurers together to talk about how we can find better climate solutions in the insurance industry. And that talks a lot at the moment, initially about decarbonisation of the financial portfolios, and now it's much more into things like sustainable claims guidelines, which we're involved in, and taking real world action to reduce the carbon footprint. Interesting, they gave a presentation recently about how their building in Cambridge was refurbished, and it was done almost entirely with a circular economy in mind. So the whole rationale was to make that a carbon neutral building, and they approached it with that in mind, so at the heart of what they were doing. So that's really how you take the layers from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change saying, here's a massive thing we need to do in the world to reduce carbon, down to what you might have to do in a business to organise it. But if you're then going to start taking actions to reduce your carbon, it's about a systems approach. It's not about thinking about one little action that you can take or two big actions that you can take to reduce the carbon. It's about fundamentally rethinking as an insurance industry how we respond. So if you think about the claims process, we've got to be thinking about the whole claims process. We can't be thinking about the building repairs or the contents or the factory roof. It's everything to do with the supply chain, from taking the insurance policy out all the way through to to repairing the building and signing it off, say, for example, or replacing the car. So I think of it as this green thread of carbon reduction going all the way through the claim. So every time you think about the insurance policy, the claim, fulfilling the needs of the customer, you're thinking about carbon reduction. And what that means in practice is that everybody involved in the insurer and every part of the insurance process has to be reconsidered and thought about in the way it can reduce the carbon footprint. And I was at a meeting yesterday and somebody talking about climate change, innovative gentleman, and he said, actually, we started to measure the impact of computers and servers and how much carbon there is created. Video calls like this, I hasten to add, and it's not an insignificant amount of carbon created by the electronic transfer of information or pictures. So some of the answers aren't always obvious, but it means that we've got to start understanding our measures, understanding how much carbon we're emitting and what is the best way to work. Okay, so let's talk about some real examples of how you can reduce the carbon across a claim. So I was asked to think about this, started to think, well, okay, do we need to visit at all? There are some insurers that are trying to settle claims electronically, so there is no person visiting. And that's a drive for some particular insurers. Others will be much more about visiting the customer and talking them through the claim experience and helping them. So the question is, does a site need to be visited? And if it does, as in there needs to be eyes in the building or at the car or whatever it is, then can it be done virtually? Can it be done by a Teams call of types like this? Lots of different technology you can use, but simply a call where you'll walk around the building with a person on their phone. Then the next question is, okay, this is a complex claim. We're going to end up with 5 or 6 people coming out to visit this building over various times. That's just inevitable. Well, technology is amazing now, and you can get 3D cameras where it can basically put that in the building and you'll get a 3D measured survey of the building and a video survey. So you'd have all the dimensions of the building, you'd be able to walk around it virtually. And the question then is, why does all these people have to visit the building if they're there to assess something or to look at something or to discuss something? Don't meet on site to discuss it, just go into the virtual room and look at the video and measure the size of that wall if you need to know the costs. So that will reduce the emissions from travel. That doesn't sound like very much, but actually this is what I'm talking about, the small things matter. Then it's about how you approach the claim. Now, interesting, in the car industry, with the car repairs, they're now using green repairs, which a lot of you will know, which means using second-hand parts or parts that aren't straight out of the factory. Now, I think most people would say, no one's going to want a second-hand part in their car. Well, no one really knows they have second-hand parts in their car. It's just done because there's nothing wrong with the item that's been taken out of the other car, or so they just put it in as a repair. Now, if that's possible, then we can certainly use building materials which have been used somewhere else, because there's not that sort of emotional sort of health and safety thought that, is the car safe? So the way I approach it is to think, let's not take things out of the building to start with, then we don't have to replace them. That's the most environmentally friendly approach. So that's make an assumption to restore and not replace. If you do that rather than just do what you've always done, then there are opportunities to really make a difference in terms of the impact. But you need the right people with the right skills to mitigate against the risk and the right actions to be taken. But when you're doing that, then some of the actions are, can I dry this building, or can it be, is the environment safe? So you can use remote monitoring now, and what that will do is it will give you live data, either on the air conditioning in the building, so in terms of VOCs, organic compounds. It will give you the temperature, the humidity. So suddenly you can know where the building's drying, if the air is safe to breathe. And there's a lot you can do. And you still haven't actually done anything that's costing money. You've just been taking an approach to restore and not replace. And then if you have items that need to be replaced, clearly that's the case in insurance, then you can recycle the old broken items or damaged items by giving them to charity. which moves on to the next stage, which is if you go and give them to charity and put them back in the wider society, maybe you recycle them back into the raw material. So an example would be a sofa, and there's rules around reusing sofas with fire regs and all that sort of thing. So they chop it up in a massive grinder, and it separates the cloth from the wood from the metal. And then those go back into our production process to make new things. But if you've managed to not strip things out, or give things to charity, or recycle back to raw material, then you're thinking, well, still things I've got to replace. Well, that's when you need to get your green specification to have a building which is replaced with building materials which are greener than what we currently buy in Jewson's or Wickes or wherever it is. You can also, if you're trying to impact the environment, is really push flood resilience, because flood resilience protects buildings against flooding, and therefore means that in a future flood you could avoid it or reduce it significantly, which saves money and saves carbon. But as all things in this world, it's not easy to do. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it. So if it's not easy, what are the things that get in the way of us achieving this lower carbon solution? Firstly is measurement. Understanding the carbon footprint of your business, of your repair, is difficult. In Sedgwick, I've been heavily involved in doing this, and there's a lot of work required to really understand the business or the repair, whatever it is. But when you do that, it's really empowering, and I'll show you in a minute what we've learned from actually understanding carbon impact. So what about the ease of material use and accessibility? Well, if you want to recycle steel, then you can do it, but it's not what people normally do in terms of recycling a steel beam, for example. So that would take extra effort. So if you want to do something different like that, or you want to use a recycled steel beam, for example, then where do you get it from? Is it available quickly? And will that impact on the claim? There's a cost impact. So if you're going to use a different product which isn't available in huge scale, it's likely to cost you more money. Equally, if you're not thinking about mitigating and finding ways to dry materials, then you need to spend a bit more money at the early stages. It will save you in the long run, but you need to make those initial decisions. There's a challenge in the construction industry about the speed of innovation. I go to lots of these shows and listen to what people are saying about the opportunity of new products. And the truth is, there's huge amounts of great ideas out there, but the number of years it takes to have a great idea turn into a factory producing a product which is widely available throughout the country is a number of years, and we need that to be happening faster. And that's accepting that if you change your claims process, your suppliers are going to have to change, your approach is going to have to change, your guidance is going to have to change. And ultimately, we're here to support our customers. So is what the customer wants what we're offering? If it isn't, how do we change that conversation to try and explain to them that we can give them something good for the environment, which also is good for them? So let's look in practice at a buildings claim. I mentioned the importance of carbon measurement. We've created a carbon calculator ourselves because we couldn't really see what we needed in the market, because we wanted to understand the carbon impacts. This is an example, a mock-up of an insurer for a certain period of time over 350,000 kilograms of carbon dioxide emissions, CO2 they call it. So this is the amount of carbon. But when you look at it, labour aspect of these building repairs is only 27,000. The building element, the actual materials, is 323,000, and there's a bit of plant. So the issue is not plant, isn't people. The issue is the materials. So then you start focusing on the things that really matter. So then we think, okay, so which are the perils or the building materials? What's material here? What do I have to focus on? And by looking at that, you start to understand: is it fire claims? Is it flood claims? Is it big claims? Is it small claims? Where is the carbon coming from? Then you're starting to really understand what the challenges you face in reducing that carbon footprint. So we go down another level. We're talking about the real practical day-to-day stuff. When you're thinking about, do you dry a building with all the materials in situ and try and restore the contents, for example, or do you strip it out? Well, let's just take the building element. I mentioned earlier remote monitoring. There's a real opportunity to use technology to actually be smarter, faster, and more environmentally friendly in using remote monitoring. So, for example, you can get remote monitoring now, which works to put the drying conditions, set the drying conditions, excuse me, and the machines will be on a low energy use, because we don't need to have them pumping out lots of heat or lots of dry air. So we can just use them on half capacity, because we know that the readings we want to achieve can be achieved on half capacity. So half capacity is half the energy use. In principle, it's less energy use. So you can save it by actually using the machinery more effectively with less energy. You save traveling to site, and you reduce the overall drying times because you know you're doing it effectively. And so that's been a really interesting innovation, but it needs driving through the industry. This assumption to restore and not replace is really key. And we know from our experience what can be saved, but there isn't the evidence in standards and guidance really to really push the fact that this works and it's a safe and effective thing to do. But so that is more work required in that area, but there's big carbon savings as a consequence. And I just put a figure at the bottom, so that might be useful to see, is that by taking this approach, we've been looking at what is the savings that could be made by not stripping out, by trying to restore. And our data shows about 30% of the carbon footprint of a building's claim can be saved by taking this approach, which is huge when you think about the costs of reducing carbon. So for no cost, you're saving 30% of the carbon. So we have to stop thinking so much about fixing it, but not breaking it in the first place. And finally, client engagement. It's really key that there's engagement with insurers at the highest level to understand with their supply chain what they want as an insurer, what they're selling to their customers. It's no good us going and talking about these great things we're doing when that's not a message that the insurer is sharing with their customers. So we need this green thread of sustainability all the way through the claim. We need the insurers bought into it, talking to their customers about it, and accepting that there will be some challenges to the status quo if you go and take this sort of lower carbon approach, and not everyone will like it. But if overall your strategic aim is to reduce the carbon footprint of your business, then it will be a necessary step to take. So again, I'm going down a bit more detail just to give you an idea in practical terms of what you can do. For this systems approach earlier, I mentioned the importance of material recycling. So this is this idea of the circular economy. So for content, let's think about content. So circular economy means you take a product, and I'll take an example actually of hemp insulation for something that's really easy to understand. Hemp is incredibly fast growing, and when it's growing really fast, it's taking carbon out of the atmosphere. You can then turn it into insulation with little use of energy and not a great use of chemicals. So you end up having a product which has taken more carbon out of the atmosphere than it took to create it. So actually, it's a negative product in terms of the whole world is getting less carbon in the atmosphere when you grow this and turn it into insulation. Then when it's finished and it needs to be replaced or the building is turned down, you can recycle and reuse that because it's a natural material. So it started off as a plant, it's turned into a material, it's negative carbon, and at the end it turns back into a natural material again. So that is a circular economy. Now the same could be said about furniture, beds. So how do you take it? A bed is created from raw materials. Then you need to take that bed and you'll use it. But at the end, what happens to the timber? What happens to the springs? So what you can do is, as I said before, break that down into its constituent parts and reuse it as metal for whatever other products you're going to make. Or you can actually just clean it up if it's damaged but not destroyed and give it to a homeless shelter. But either way, if you give that to the homeless shelter doesn't have to buy a new bed. So there's one less bed in the world because you've taken this bed and you've reused it. It's really interesting. We look at builders' skips and you look at recycling plants. They say 98% of our waste is recycled. You think, oh, well, there's no problem then. There's nothing to fix. What you find out when you do some digging is that a lot of the waste is burned. So what we're doing is we're taking plastics, wood, and we're putting it in a massive furnace, burning it and creating lots of CO2. So actually, you'd be much better to take timber, that, for example, of that example there, taking it and turning it back into chipboard, which is a circular economy. It grows in a tree, it's used in a building for something, it's put in a skip, the skip goes to the recycling plant, they send it to the wood chippers, they turn it back into chipboard, and it goes in another building again. And that's circular, going back, and we're not using new raw materials. There's some examples there below that you can recycle: mattresses, carpets, tiles, all sorts of things you can do now. But it's small scale and therefore not done routinely. And that's the difference we've got to make, I think. So when you get into the final part of it, this is the green specification. So when you're able to work out what the high carbon items are, then you can target your emission reduction plan looking at that across your portfolio. So you say, okay, so I'm doing a lot of escape of waters, for example, then that is going to affect the insulation in a loft if the tank's gone in the loft. So a classic item for replacement is insulation. So we looked at that and we looked at paint. And when we did some analysis of the repairs that our contractor network does, to say, okay, how much of this do we do? How much does it cost now? If we were to change the product, what would the impact be in terms of cost, and what would the impact be in terms of carbon? And that example of hemp insulation, another one is graphene infused paint. If you make that change, then some stats here showing that hemp insulation and graphene paint across a portfolio could reduce carbon by 4% with a less than 1% increase in cost. Now the question is, does the insurer want to pay for it? That's fine. Does the customer want the product? Yeah, all good questions. But it can be done, but you need to understand the impact and the costs. Okay, so when you're talking about low carbon materials and which ones you choose, you're looking at the big ticket items where there's most carbon, and then trying to make a difference. That's the obvious thing to do. When you've got a lot of something and it's high carbon, that's the best place to start. So just a couple of examples, I think, to send the slides out afterwards, is you can make a difference now by just changing the specification of your cement, which will reduce the carbon footprint a little bit, but maybe additional cost. It depends where you're buying and what you're buying. Sometimes you'll start to see products out there where you're replacing parts of the normal Portland cement with other cement substitutes. And ultimately, there's Heidelberg Materials, a building plant in the UK, which is going to take carbon dioxide as they're making the cement, take it from the atmosphere, capture it, take it under the sea, and basically put it in old oil wells. So they'll be capturing the carbon and putting it away forever. You can recycle steel rather than make it from virgin steel. That's great because it's 5 times less carbon than new steel, recycled steel. We've recycled a whole steel frame building in the UK and turned it into rebar for the construction industry. You can sell your old steel and it can be reused in its current form. You can build whole buildings out of low carbon steel. So but the supply chain is not there to do it routinely and simply, so it takes a bit of effort. But again, the challenge is just with these materials is the inertia against using something different because people are comfortable with what they specify, surveyors, architects. Are there challenges with compatibility? So paint's a really good example. The paint needs to be compatible with the substrate it's painted on. So if you put a sealer on it, not all these paints will work with the sealers. You have to understand that these things are compatible, and you understand what is the risk associated with the different products. So if you have a product which is, I guess, how do I best describe it? Not got the right certificate, I suppose. So you get British standard. So it didn't have a British standard. It had a lower level of certification. Then everyone's, I just have the British standard one. But it takes time to get British standard approved products through the testing process. So an insurer could decide, I want a test, but it doesn't have to be the best test. And I'm happy to use a product which has not got the best sort of seal of approval on, but everybody thinks is going to work. So that's an early adoption of a technology without waiting for all of the information. Just bringing to a close here, I just want to explain what success looks like. I tried a pilot with Insurer who was looking at how we could to engage with customers. And we took 70 commercial claims, and about a third of them people, you could see from the claim that there was an opportunity to reduce the carbon footprint. That's stuff that we could do. Most customers were into the concept. Yeah, I wouldn't mind doing this. Of course, most of them found barriers not to do it, because that's what I talked about already today. But there's opportunities there. And we realised it didn't actually cost you money a lot of time if you mitigated against the damage, stopped stripping out, and donated and reused materials in circular economy. So just a few examples on the right there about saving materials, therefore not having to replace them, therefore saving money and saving carbon. Reusing furniture and giving it to charity, repurposing carpet, and low carbon repairs. So in summary, if you're going to take this approach, reducing the carbon footprint of a claim and focusing really on I'm looking at the building element now as an example, you need to create a systems approach. It's restore, not replace. It's using a circular economy to recycle. It's finding material choices that are safe to use and have some sort of certification, but require a lower carbon solution, and have those processes for monitoring and working out that what savings you're making. It's about incremental improvements. You're not going to have one solution to this. Everything's got to improve in small amounts at a time. And there are barriers, and you have to push those barriers out of the way to make it happen. So green materials are great. There's opportunities to do it, but they might cost a bit more money, and they might get in the way of normal supply chains. And ultimately, you have to work with your supply chain, your insurer, your customer, to actually make it happen. So clearly, insurers have a crucial role to play as the holders of the customer and providing a promise to the customer. Are they willing to cover the high cost of materials? Are they going to sell this concept to their customers? Is it going to be a virtue, or is it going to be something they quietly do without having to make a big fuss? Will they take that risk of taking lower carbon products, which maybe haven't got all the certification, but everybody thinks it's going to work, but it hasn't got all that certification yet? Are they going to insist on it, or are they just going to make it optional to customers? So what you find is it's a really interesting area. There's loads of challenges, but also loads of opportunities. And I think a whole new world is opening up in low carbon insurance claims. And yeah, an interesting issue for the future, I think. So on that note, I shall stop talking and pass back really, I guess, to our host to see if there's any questions come through, or anybody has any questions.
I'm having difficulty with my camera there. But
no problem.
So yeah, thank you very much. That was really interesting. I think both looking at it from the claims journey, but also from a personal view, it makes you think a couple of times before you just open the bin lid and pop it in there.
Absolutely.
Or take a trip to the tip. So at the moment, there aren't any questions been submitted on the chat, but there's time, and I do have a couple that were put to us before the session, so I'll share those with you. So the question we had was, how much are insurers asking about these sorts of solutions and challenges? So how high up or how much is their appetite?
Yes, well, I think as with all things, they're early adopters, aren't they? And they're the people that will be dragged kicking and screaming along. The early adopters are really excited about the opportunities this brings, because they see maybe a business opportunity to be able to see a corner of the market where people want more sustainable solutions or more sustainable products, and they're willing to pay for it. So there's that area. There's insurers which are well on the journey of setting their targets, and they're thinking, oh, I've got lots of targets here. How am I going to reduce that? Who's going to help me to reduce that target? So for suppliers, people sort of working with insurers, I think there's opportunities for them too, to be able to help insurers find new solutions, work in partnership. So almost all insurers are talking about it to us all the time. Some are more proactive than others and taking action. And the truth is, I think they're finding it hard to find the solutions, which is, I guess I've explained, hopefully today.
Thank you. And the other question, not dissimilar. So this is looking at the barriers. So what barriers are you coming up against to reduce the carbon impact of the claims process? Also, what would be the top 2 or 3 barriers that you face?
I think the biggest barrier probably is the view that it's going to cost a lot of money. And thinking about if there's a little bit of money spent in this one area, then it's going to put a claim spend and we can't do it. Whereas if you look at it holistically about how you approach, as I said, the whole claim and try and implement these approaches, your claim spend can go down. So I think the biggest challenge is the perception that it's expensive to do this. It's difficult, but it's not the same as expensive. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge. I think the second challenge I would highlight is entrenched opinions and supply chains. You know, if businesses are working really hard doing what they're doing, then changing it and, you know, getting a lower carbon material, for example, as a builder from a different supplier is just extra hassle and just gets in the way of doing the day job. So I think those are the 2 key areas we're finding on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you very much. Just had a quick check. There's no more questions submitted. So I'll do a little bit of a thank you and a goodbye. So that if someone has a question, it's not too late. So yeah, so thank you again for the time and sharing that information with us. It was really interesting, and I hope that everyone attending agreed with me as well. Just for those attending, to let you know that the recording and the slides will be shared with you. It just takes us a little while to tidy up the recording and get it through, but it will be on the way to you. And so another request in terms of the feedback, I've just popped the form on there for some feedback, and it is really is important because it does help us shape topics and how we share these updates with you in the future. So I think we are questionless. So you've filled them with so much knowledge, they don't have room for any more.
That's
so
good.
Yeah, so thank you to Ian, and thank you to everyone that has joined us.
Thanks very much. Bye, everyone.
Yeah, bye.